We want to help everyday people be inspired and equipped to be disciple makers in today's culture. We think there are more and more people who want to make disciples of Jesus, and we want to help you so that you can. Welcome to today's Disciple Maker. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Disciple Maker, a Beulah podcast. My name is Caleb Selders. I am joined today by Pastor Tim Doherty. Tim, how are you doing?
I'm doing overall great, notwithstanding the fall I had on my trail run this morning. I was just telling you about, yeah. Otherwise, I'm doing great.
Holding up.
Yeah, I'm good.
Good. All right. Tim, what's new in life? Tell us a bit about yourself, maybe for those that don't know you yet.
Yeah. Well, what's new is I'm at a stage of life, both I'm almost 25 years married next year, and we have teenagers. One of them is now made her way into young adulthood. Mm-hmm. And so there's lots of transition actually over the last year. I've learned how much exactly a graduation from high school costs. It astonished me. And so my one daughter entered into high school, the other one finished high school. And so just got we've been getting some great news about how things are going for her. And we're encouraged by that. Mm-hmm. Life at home overall is good. How about you? Tell me about your year.
Yeah, it's been a good year. It's been fun. My wife, Lauren, and I, we've been married just about 3.5 years now. We've just bought our first place. So that's the big news of the year, I would say.
That's huge.
That was back in July. We purchased our first home, and we decided to purchase one that featured about 1,300 square feet of hot pink carpet, straight out of the 70s. And so the last few months have been nothing but dealing with that. And
nice.
Ripping that up, putting all new flooring down.
That's crazy.
It's been the theme.
And it's going exactly on schedule?
As they always do.
Yeah, right. Right.
No, not at all.
Any, compared to what you hoped for, where are you at?
I thought we'd be done probably a month or two ago. And we'll be done in the new year sometime.
And when did your wife think you were going to be done? No, maybe that's too much. I shouldn't ask you that question.
Honestly, don't know.
This reminds me of, and I think I shared this with you before, that I had a friend of mine, goes back something like 15 years. He was my age. He owned this house that was at least 120, 130 years old. Decided it was time to renovate. They had 4 kids that wanted new bedrooms and all that stuff. And there was a point when I walked into his house and walked in the main entrance, and I remember walking toward the kitchen, and I could see from the level, which was ground level, I could see into the basement and the upstairs and the attic. Like I could see 4 stories of house. I could see right through, like they had torn out everything else. And I remember talking to his dad a few weeks later about his son's renovation project. Mm-hmm. And he just kind of shook his head. He was a quieter man, didn't have a lot of words. And he said something like, yeah, every renovation, it takes 3 times as long and costs twice as much as you expect.
Unbelievably true.
Yes.
About as much wisdom maybe as we'll get tonight.
Yeah. Well, okay. Right.
Hopefully more.
So anyways, this connected for me, like thinking of renovations and transition, this conversation we want to have in this podcast is about the changing conversation, changing awareness amongst so many people, everyday people, and certainly amongst church leaders, but amongst people that, however we understood things before, there's a renovation going on in our imagination, a renovation going on in at least the Western church. Some would say it's been underway for decades, but it really seems to have accelerated in the last couple of years. And we're in transition from what was into what's going to be. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation, hoping it's going to equip people and inspire people. And
So as for this first conversation, the topic that we've got, we want to just explore quite thematically this idea of what is a disciple, what's a disciple maker. That seems to be the buzzword I think that you're referring to around the church these days, something that people are thinking about. Yeah. And so we want to explore some of the thoughts. Are disciples, are those just the people way back in the day actually walking around with Jesus when he was here? If it refers to people in the church today, is it only those called to pastoral ministry or, hyperactive church members, something like that? Right. Or is it possible that this term disciple, this identity disciple, a disciple maker, that actually applies to all of us who believe in Jesus, who believe that he is God in the flesh, come to earth, crucified, resurrected, to pay for our sin? is it all of us who believe this that are actually disciples and disciple makers, that we are called and equipped to be that? And so we want to explore that a little bit today, unpack the concept, and I think call out some of the common understandings that we are aware of for those of us in the church with us, and kind of hold that up against what the Bible teaches us about what it is to be a disciple, and hopefully find some clarity on the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think in finding that clarity, as I talk with people, I've had this kind of a conversation with lots of people in the last 3 or 4 years especially. I think that kind of clarity, and then as it connects for them back to Jesus' life and life with the first people who followed him, they find they're attracted to it. People are attracted to it, and yet it just gets like this spot of, so can I live that way? I wonder what that would take, and so on. So hope it's going to be helpful.
Maybe you're getting to it a little bit there, but before we get into the meat of that discussion, do you think you could, for a moment, just explain why it is that we wanted to start with this as our first episode, kind of just unpacking the whole idea, the concept? What's the importance of that, do you think?
Well, I think it emerges both out of a study of the scriptures and continue to spend time, but we've been reading the scriptures for decades. I've been alive long enough to have been reading the scriptures for decades, but I think because of a growing awareness in the church, I'd say at least among leaders, that we weren't seeing all the fruit that we desired to see, and fruit could include the transformation of people's lives. The fruit we desired to see was the ownership of this life that we believe that people were called to. The degree of ownership in that was maybe lacking, or it was partial. And then if you just ask, okay, so who's going to do the work to see, what we believe Jesus wants to do in the earth? Who's going to do the work? And it was like there was so few people who actually seemed to be committed to that. And I don't mean that in like a criticizing kind of way. It was just a reality. So desiring more and better fruit. And then you think about the kingdom of God and so on. There was this growing desire of, well, have we lost something? Have we lost something? Is there something we need to recover? So, and then, the last few years since 2020 accelerated so many things through just the combination of all the things that have been in flux and all the troubles and challenges that humanity has faced. That is a great environment. I mean that word didn't feel positive, but it's a great environment to actually stimulate change, including in the church. And people are just returning to first things. Right. So this is a first thing. So and then this, you go to the scriptures and you ask the question, so I've never thought about this. Says somebody, how many times is Christian mentioned in the New Testament? And we find out it's 3 times. I just returned to it again yesterday. It's in like twice in Acts and once in 1 Peter. And it's always a derogatory kind of term.
Not used by the Christians themselves.
It's not used by what we call Christians now, which doesn't mean it's a derogatory term today. But then so what is the term that's used? Well, it's disciples and believers and brothers and sisters and so on. But the term disciples is used like 260 times or something.
That's the word.
So we say, I think it's kind of it's kind of a first thing. So let's start talking about that.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk about it then.
Yeah.
Not beating around the bush. What is a disciple? Crash course.
Well, we got this from somebody else, and I just thought it was very helpful because in one verse you could see the whole entirety of it, and then so the single verse is Matthew 4:19. There's a very similar statement quoting Jesus in Mark 1:17, I think it is. But Matthew 4:19, come and follow me, and I will make you fishers of people, or fishers of men. And in that statement, there's 3 aspects. There's the following Jesus somewhere. And I see, if I read the stories of Jesus, it's both a geographic thing. He's taking us to new places, but it's also I did believe this way, and now I'm being taken to new places of belief, and so on. The second one is, and I will make you. I will make you. You're currently fishermen, literally. You put your net in the water and you pull fish out of the water. I'm going to make you into something that you weren't before. And we see that, of course, happens throughout the rest of Jesus' ministry and the rest of the New Testament. There's this, I'm being changed by him. I'm following him, and I'm being changed by him continually. following, being changed, and then the third one is fishers of people, right?
Right.
And the language we like is join Jesus in what he's doing in the world. And we could tie that into a number of other, the Great Commission of go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them everything I've commanded. And the rest of what we hear in the New Testament is there are things Jesus wants to do in the world, things that Jesus is doing, and the leading way he does it is through people, his disciples. So a disciple's following, they're being changed by him, and they're joining him in what he's doing in the world. And I find that a very inspiring whole picture of a life that he's called me to. He's called us to.
Right. Beautiful.
Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
Very well. So I think one of the things that I've come to understand that you do and have historically done that I really appreciate, you keep your finger on the pulse, so to speak. And so I understand that annually or semi-annually, whatever it is, you have a habit of just cold calling folks in the congregation. You've got a list of questions, telemarketer style. You just want to rattle those off.
Telemarketer style. Yeah. Thank you.
And understand what people are thinking in the church. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've done that for each of the last 3 years in the spring. We also have surveyed our congregation. Well, we've surveyed our congregation, like, what do you think about this? What do you value, and so on. We've also used assessment tools or reflection tools at various points. And I've always been involved in those projects over the last 10 years.
Okay. So based on all that, have you had much of that directed to getting an understanding of people in the church, how they think about this topic? Do they have kind of their own definition of disciple? How do they understand that? You mentioned terms like believer and follower earlier as well.
Yeah.
Are those terms what do people think about those? Are they ones that they're using for themselves?
Yeah. And I have loved those. Like, those have been a huge gift to me, those conversations. So there's assessment reflection tools, you get back kind of data, and it's anonymous. And then you have these personal conversations I have had. And then a few on my team that I work with have also had a few of those conversations this last few months. Before I talk about what we found out, is I love this. About 10 or 12 years ago, I heard from the world of marketing, of all places, this idea that it's stuck with me just permanently. And that is, they were talking about brands. So you think of Nike as a brand and McDonald's as a brand, et cetera. And these people teaching marketing, saying a brand is not what you say it is, it's what they say it is. And that idea has stayed with me as a leader and as someone who I think I have an idea of where we should go or where it would be good to go. And I can start to define things. And I can say a disciple is. I can even say Jesus says a disciple is. We could even say Jesus, we look at his lifestyle and we say they lived a certain way. And still what's in play is what's the idea, what's the definition, what's the reality in the mind of every single person. So in a way, you can say, well, you can say what a disciple is, but a disciple is, it's what that a person concludes a disciple is. So that has actually led me into having these conversations. Well, let's find out. What do people think? So I would just this year I called up 20 random people, and it was really cool. One of the people I talked to, I think, has been at Beulah for longer than 75 years. Wow. It was 70 or 75 years. It was an amazing conversation. So cool to talk. And then other people have been around Beulah for like 2 months. Yeah. And, a teenager, somebody, a few in their 20s and 40s and 50s and so on. And around this question, so the first question I would ask is, how would you describe yourself? And what I mean is, would you say you're a Christian or you're curious about Jesus, follower, disciple? And people would answer that question. And up until this year, everybody answered Christian or follower, which is fine, right? It's kind of expected in a Canadian context. And then this year I started to hear there were like 3 or 4 or 5 people, I can't remember for sure exactly, but 3 or 4 or 5 said, I'm a disciple of Jesus, which was cool to begin to hear emerge. And maybe that's happening. People's imagination is shifting, or we talk about it a lot more in the last few years. And then the next question I asked, I think this is the second question, was imagine a friend of yours asked you, and if I was calling you up, I'd say, hey,
Yeah.
Caleb, imagine a friend of yours asked you,
Mm-hmm.
is there a difference between whatever you said? Let's say you said, I'm a follower of Jesus, right?
Yep.
Is there a difference between a follower and a disciple? What would you say? And almost every single time over the last 3 years, people would say, well, actually, yeah, there's a difference. And the overall tone of people connected to Beulah, new ones, long-term people, has been Christians and followers, and this is what we say. We collectively generally say Christians and followers are people who believe certain things.
Mm-hmm.
They go to church things. Some of them say that. Mostly they focus on belief. And then when they think about disciple, they say, I think a disciple is committed. I think a disciple, people would use the term like the disciple lives the life.
Mm.
Or they would say a disciple wants other people to also know Jesus. But there was always this contrasting of, well, Christians and followers believe certain things. Disciples are committed. There's a desire. There's a whole more of their life kind of thing,
Wow.
which was really interesting. And then I
Yeah.
would encourage people and say, I don't want you to feel like you're being criticized or something by this. We're just asking, how do you see this? Right? They go, yeah. And then as they would continue to talk the rest of the conversation, I generally heard that people find the idea, at least, of being a disciple of Jesus attractive.
Okay.
That's a long answer, but I got
No,
one piece to add.
Yeah, keep going.
I said there were a couple people who said there wasn't a difference. Two or three people this spring said, no, actually, Tim, there's no difference between follower, Christian, disciple. And I talked with them for like half an hour, these people that I called, I realized that the formational environment for these two or three people was a very different environment that wasn't North American.
Mm.
And for them, doesn't matter what title you use, here's how they understood it, and included this walk the walk kind of idea. It included this commitment. It included this desire for other people to know Jesus. And so for them, it didn't matter what term you use. That's the thing.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
what Jesus called us to, and that's how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
And which I also found interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I guess to tease that out then, to look at some of these distinctions that maybe are perceived, these categories, so to speak, could you speak at all to, you referenced it earlier about the Bible having used certain terms very rarely or quite often. Do you think the way that Jesus sees it, is there categories? Is there distinctions that should be made, or do you think would it be more like the latter, where it really ought to be just one?
Yeah, I think there's a way to answer that question that it has been answered. I'll say I felt like I said yes to Jesus. Yes, I believe that you're real. Yes, my sin is real. Yes, I need forgiveness. Wow, you died to forgive me. That was for me in my late 20s. And so I began to serve as a pastor 5 or 6 or 7 years after that. And in all my years of being a pastor, more than 20 years, of course, disciple was in the environment. You read the Bible, there's disciple, but the terms churches preferred to use was this follower idea and so on, because disciple was just considered to be this old word and so on, or it was like a idealistic word or something in today's usage. Yeah. And I remember even as recently as something like 10 years ago or 8 years ago, kind of being bothered by people that were just hammering on this disciple word, because I went like disciple, follower, whatever, right? It means the same thing. But actually in recent years, I come to see, both for the reasons I just explained, the way it's understood, more because of the way it's understood, it lost, there came to be a difference between a Christian, a follower, and a disciple. It's a bit of a long way around to then say, so what does Jesus say? Well, as far as Jesus is concerned, he wants disciples. But I don't want us to hear that in a pressuring kind of way or a critical kind of way. Right. And so what's been important to us has been to begin to try to voice the kind of voice that he had with people. And he begins with a come and see.
Right.
He doesn't say, are you in or out? Are you going to be a disciple or not?
Mm-hmm.
It's not how he begins with people. He just says, they're curious. John chapter 1, a couple of John the Baptist's disciples, John 1 says, come and they ask Jesus, hey, Rabbi, where are you staying? You remember this story, right? And he says, come and see. And that's what he starts with. And then Andrew goes to his brother and says, I think we found the Messiah. No, to Nathaniel. He goes to Nathaniel. And I forgot that right. But yeah. And then and Nathaniel, he has his response. And then Andrew says to him, hey, come and see. And so that's been important to me and to us to begin with people there, not to kind of hold out some sort of, do you measure up kind of definition over people?
Yeah.
But instead, that's a destination and it's a direction we're going to be pointed in.
Right.
So then then Jesus says, come and follow me. Then he says, come and be with me. Then later in this life with people, then he says, come take up your cross.
Right.
Right. And then eventually he's saying, go and make disciples. But it's more of a progressive, more of a journey that he's inviting real people who've got their varying degrees of readiness kind of postures, and he's inviting them in a direction. Of course, he does eventually challenge them, but it begins with invitation.
Right. And you would say that at each of those stages along the way, disciple really ought to still be the term.
I'm glad you asked. Yeah. Disciple's the term we ought to use. And then people will start to say, so when does being a disciple begin? And
You have an answer for that?
I feel like you have questions about that, but I don't know. Like, was Andrew a disciple as soon as he said to somebody else, come and see? Well, if we use that definition, disciple is following Jesus, being continually changed by him, and joining in what he's doing in the world. I'm not really all that interested in trying to find where was the starting line, but a person knows themselves.
Right.
Am I following Jesus even a little bit? He's way. I feel like he's way ahead of me, but I'm kind of curious about him. I'm interested in. Okay, well, you're kind of sounding like you're on the way to being a disciple, if not already.
Right. To I guess maybe further go a little bit deeper into this idea of a disciple. When I love Jesus' teaching, just how many pictures and how many stories. It's just something that he relies on so commonly. Yeah. And I think it's powerful because I think there's so much more that we can gather from a concept than maybe just trying to string the right sequence of words together to explain something. Is there a picture or a story or something that you could use to maybe illustrate what is the heart posture of a disciple look like? Oh, yeah.
Well, I think of two things, and if I forget the second thing, remind me. The second thing is Peter's life. Just look at the sort of a biography of Peter's life. But the first thing that comes to mind is moments. So we've already talked about that first moment. Come and see. Like there's people are coming up to this rabbi they don't know, and they're asking a question, where are you staying? And he's saying, come and see. And there's a posture then on the part of those who would become disciples of okay, right? There's a responsiveness. Right. Is the first thing, right? They're responsive. When he says, come and follow me, he then has chosen certain ones, right? Come and follow me. What do? They respond and they obey. It's a heavy word to us, obey, but he says, come and follow. They follow. That's obedience, right? So there's a receptivity and responsiveness, and there's he said it, so I'm going to do it. That shows up we talked about Peter. Well, I'll come back to Peter, but in Luke 5, he and his buddies have been fishing all night, and Jesus shows up on the shore, and it's day, and I guess in the world of fishing, in that part of the world anyways, you start to put your nets away, and Jesus asked him, have you caught any fish? He says, no, and you can imagine he's frustrated. He says, cast the net on the other side, and what does Peter say? What's the first?
What we've been out here all night.
I've been out here all night, but because you say so, I will. Right. Or whatever the translation is, it's something like that. But because you say so, I will. So the posture of a disciple. And now this is further on, right? This isn't first thing in Peter's life with Jesus, but it is a next further on thing. And he's going, I'm frustrated, it's not going to work, all that kind of thing. But because Jesus said so, I will. So that readiness to obey, which then is going to involve, like, am I willing to decrease me so that he can increase? When we talked about follow, being changed by, and joining what he's doing.
Yeah.
Less of where I think we should go, more of where he thinks I should go. Less of what I'm naturally like, more of what he is like. Less of my agenda for what should happen in the world, more of what he wants for the world. Right? Yeah. So then the second image is like just picture Peter in those first encounters, Mark chapter 2, Jesus moves into Peter and his wife's house in Capernaum, and the crowds start to gather. Actually, here at Beulah, we've been preaching through Mark for a while, and we covered that part of the story. And that time in his life, he's just like, who is this guy, right? And what is he doing, right? Yeah. But it comes to this later points where Jesus is commanding him to do certain things, and he's obeying and he's doing that. They send them out to go and heal, and don't take anything with you. And Peter's on that mission, of course. But along the way, even up to the day that Jesus goes to the cross, we very famously, Peter denies Jesus, right? But that's the same guy who, of course, writes 1st and 2nd Peter, which is a number of years later. And by the time he's writing that, there is a lovely and, to me, deeply moving transformation has happened in this guy's life. And all of his instructions in the latter half of 1 Peter are centered on because Jesus went to the cross, because Jesus died in our place, we die with him. It's a theological statement. It's a theological reality. And therefore, these are the implications for you as married people, for you as working people, for you as leaders, etc. Yeah. And he ties all of them back to the cross. Right. That's not the same guy who first met Jesus. Yeah. And so those are beautiful images for me of, what's the life of a disciple look like?
That is beautiful. And I think that's one of the things that, perhaps we miss a lot is I think the word disciple has a finished product sort of implication. Yeah, right. Is maybe the understanding a lot of the time, but I think so clearly it's the journey of discipleship. Yeah. And as I was reflecting on that and I think the way that people wrestle, I've been struck for the last few years by just Ephesians 5:1, which is be imitators of God as beloved children. Yeah. And it's just incredible to me that for as many times as the word disciple is used, how often the word child or little children appears in the New Testament to describe the same people. Yes. And I think that is such a powerful picture of that. You're almost always at the starting point and you're just continuing to grow, but we don't seem to grow out of the childlikeness in following him and the dependency and the wonder and all of those things. Yeah.
And I love that you added those and still, for whatever reasons, it became or it becomes easy to kind of acquiesce to, well, at least I believe certain things. Yeah, right. I got my afterlife taken care of. Yeah, good enough. But Jesus has so much more for us, right? Where he wants to take us, and the more he wants to give us, and do in us.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're starting to go there now, but maybe that's kind of the next piece is for those that maybe can, in their mind, there's a distinction. Maybe they see themselves as, I believe, and that's good enough as far as I understand. Yeah. But I'm also aware that there is this other life that I hear about of following him and obeying his commands, doing the things that he does. Yeah. What would you have to say to those that maybe are nervous, hesitant, whatever you want to say, to make that next step, or for some reason or another might even disqualify themselves from being able to do that? Yeah. And well, I was sharing with you right before we started today that I picked up for what I was looking for a book. I run out of books around the house to read from the library and stuff, and so I picked up this old biography of Abraham Lincoln, well-known leader in the Western world, and from the 1800s, of course, became president of the United States and campaigned, whatever the better word would be,
to abolish slavery in the United States. And there were a couple like really important things that I read from his life in the last few days. And one of them was and I want to acknowledge this, both to speak to that person who's wondering, could I really? And one of the things he says, if we were to look at, the reality that we've come to in the North American church, we just speak to North America, has been that whatever we intended the last 50 to 60 years, let's say, whatever we intended, what we kind of more have is an understanding, like in our imagination, is what we're supposed to be as Christians and churchgoers. And in Canada, a Christian is somebody who holds private beliefs that guarantee a future in heaven. And of course, it morally affects you. You'll be a somewhat different person, but that's the gist of it. I believe certain things and it has some effect on my life. And then I go to church things when it works for me. And this life we're describing, the disciple, is so much more and so much fuller than that, right? And so much richer. And I was reading Lincoln, and the challenge he's tackling is we have slavery in the South, we have people in the North that think we shouldn't have slavery in America. Can we go forward as a one nation when all these people want it and all these people think we shouldn't have it? And he acknowledges something. He says, and this is years before things got really, intense for them. He says, people say this, he's referring to slavery, is so entrenched. I don't think it's possible to remove it. I'm totally paraphrasing him. But he says, when they say that, I understand what they're saying. Like, I can't disagree with them. In other words, when things have become so well accepted and established, right, I'm not going to say to somebody, it's easy to change. Yeah. It's not easy to change. And the second thing he says is, I actually don't know how we're going to get there entirely. I'm reading he's in the 1850s. I have ideas, of course, but I don't have a full picture of how we're going to get there. And I just need to acknowledge that. And I could continue with something, so we're going to find out together. That's the posture we're in.
Yeah, okay.
So I want someone to listen and say, it's not like there's some people that are way down the road, they've figured everything out, and they're waiting for us to try to just get with it and catch up. Right. No, it's more like Jesus has more for us, and he's inviting us to something. And let's go with him there, and we're going to find out together to recover, if you like, the life and ways of Jesus, and all that he has for us. And really, you talk about that last aspect, join Jesus in what he wants to do in the world. God doesn't have another plan.
Yeah, right.
He doesn't have another plan but to use us, right? So, and it's so good and meaningful and rich to join him in what he's doing in the world. Yeah. Now I've lost track of your question.
No, I think you got there. That's just fine. I want to ask another one, just to kind of leave with a more practical sort of perspective on that. For anybody who's listening to that and thinking about this and maybe recognizing themselves to be in one place and thinking about where they could go, or someone that maybe has seen themselves as a full-on disciple of Jesus for a long time. I think for all of those alike, in terms of next steps, what do you have any sort of what's next on the journey? How do you tease that out? What does that look like?
This happened for me, and it's a strange shift to reflect back on. But it's like I read the Bible for a lot of years as a really heart-devoted, like, I really love you, God. Right? And I really love people. I'm experiencing your love for people. And I'm reading the Bible both as this is a way through which I connect with God personally, individually. And also, if you like, here's how it works. Both, here's how life works with God. Cover to cover of the Bible, here's how life works. Here's what God is like. And also here's how we are to be as the church. Right. And I read it for years, and it's like what I never really saw let myself imagine was the lifestyle that Jesus lived. Instead, I read the Bible more as like, where are the instructions for me?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, where's the sentence? Where's the command? And that's a relevant question to ask.
Sure.
But what I missed was, how was his life shaped?
Yeah.
And so I guess a next step for someone might be, try reading the Gospels or just one of the Gospels and let yourself imagine what a day-to-day life look like as you're reading these stories for Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think he didn't just do that for then, and then, the plans all change from here forward. As soon as you get into the third century, it's going to be all different. I think because he is God, and Father, Son, and Spirit are the community of all of creation.
Yeah.
Then as Jesus comes into the human context, the human family, he then is going to not only teach us instructions, but he's going to model something for us.
Yeah.
This is what the life of God looks like.
Yeah.
So that brought new eyes for me. And maybe some goes like, no, I always read it that way. Well, okay, that's fantastic, right?
Yeah.
But I want to say, if you haven't, let yourself imagine what it was like. And you know what's helpful? Some people might not love this, but I have found that my imagination, when I go back to the scriptures, the possibility for my imagination to try to imagine what was life, the day-to-day life with Jesus like, it's real open up as I watch The Chosen. Right? This TV show centered on the life of Jesus. It's not all scripture. The writers have tried to imagine around that. Okay, well, and there's many moments where we're going, well, that makes sense. First century and so on. And then we're also reading lots of the Jesus story.
Yeah.
But my imagination for what it was like to eat, drink, hang out with, the size of the conversations, sometimes it's just two of them.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a house full.
Yeah.
And the other next step is, reading the Bible, let yourself imagine what Jesus' life was like with people. And the other one is, you hear us talk about it around here all the time. We really are sincere. Those practices we talk about, that's our way of framing a Jesus-shaped life together with others. You're going to gather and you're going to become family over time.
Yeah.
You're going to grow as somebody who was something, and he's changing you over time. He's maturing you. He's growing you. He's adding into your life, right? You're going to follow him together. You're going to give together. You're going to gather and grow, and you're going to give together because more and more you realize he served and he died, and that's the same life that I'm called into, is to serve others because he died for me.
Right.
And so we say, so what has he given me? And how am I going to become part of this community that has needs in the community even, and I'm going to help meet those needs, right? And there's a wide spectrum of kinds of needs.
Right.
And then we're going to go together because disciples join Jesus in what he's doing in the world. He does, like I said, he doesn't have another plan, and so we're going to go. There's people who don't know him yet, and the way they're going to know is through us.
Right.
So let's go together. And so life together in community shaped by those practices is an ongoing step for me. I'm never going to grow out of that lifestyle.
Right. And I think that's continual learning. I was thinking as you were speaking there about a piece that I read in, I think it's one of Tim Keller's books. He talks about how what was transformational for him, similar as a fresh way of looking at the gospel, was flowed out of a comment that someone had made to him one time about his preaching. How apparently this individual knew his preaching well enough that they could tell when he hadn't prepared. And they knew he hadn't prepared because all he did was quote C.S. Lewis all day long. Because he just knew it, and it just came flowing out of him naturally. And so he didn't need to prepare when he encountered a question, that's what just would come out. But what was transformational for him, and I think what is transformational for all of us, is to look at the Gospels that way, as this opportunity to be so immersed in the life and the words of Jesus and the person that he is, that we begin to know him, and that we begin to genuinely have his words and his likeness flow out of us as we encounter things day to day. And I think that framing of the gospel and going to it for that purpose and with that lens, I think I think there's really something there
Yeah.
for us in this journey.
And so I'm ongoingly I'm discovering the life of God
Right.
by trying to practice it together with others,
Mm.
because Jesus is in our midst.
Yeah. Wow. Wonderful. Well, I think we could probably talk about this for another few days straight, but I think I will draw our first topic to a close there.
Cool.
I think there's a lot more conversation to be had, and I look forward to that. But for now, I think that's all.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thanks,
Tim.
Caleb.